afraid of the dark.
Greetings, my listener. Before I start, I really ask you to support the channel with your activity. Today we are telling our 90th story. If you like or dislike our stories, please tell us about it in the comments. Let's go. If you are unsure about listening to such a gory story, you better check out this horror flick. Poltergeist possession is a very scary, dangerous thing. I had a wife. We loved each other. We spent a lot of time together. She often went with me and my friends on trips to nature. But she died in a car accident on her way back from one of those trips. My friends only got away with fractures and bruises. But my wife died. I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's just too hard to remember. A couple of years later, we gathered with the same group of friends to go on another trip to the countryside, near a lake in the forest. We were going to spend the night there. Everyone had already taken time off work. It was a very hot summer. There were 5 of us: me, John, Mike, Sarah, and Emily. I had a car, so in the morning around 9 o'clock I started driving to pick everyone up. Once we were all together, we headed to our favorite spot in the forest. Everyone was in high spirits and having fun. John was smiling the whole way, telling jokes from time to time. Mike, on the other hand, told funny stories whenever John took a break between jokes. Sarah and Emily were chatting about some new guy at Sarah's work, laughing along with everyone else. When we arrived, we started setting up our campsite. We pitched tents, built a campfire, and assembled the grill. In short, we were in the process of getting everything ready. By the time we finished, it was 1:30. I was in charge of grilling the food while the others went for a swim in the lake. I could hear their laughter and knew they were having a good time. It was a perfect summer weekend. As for me, I could only dip my feet in the water because I was too scared to go in deeper. After a while, we sat down at a foldable table to eat. We stayed there for quite a long time, running back and forth between the water and the table. In the evening, as it started to get dark, we packed up the table, cleaned up, and made tea by the campfire. We told each other scary stories and jokes, and then the girls went to their tent while we guys went to ours. I woke up in the middle of the night. I hadn't been sleeping well. I stepped out of the tent to have a smoke, sat by the water, and stared at the lake. When I finished my cigarette and was about to go back, I heard someone calling my name from the forest. It was a familiar voice, and I recognized it immediately. It was the voice of my wife, Alice. I stood up and hesitated for a moment. I didn't wake the others or say anything to them. Instead, I walked into the forest, following the voice. I walked quite a distance from our campsite deep into the forest until I reached a clearing. It was large and covered in mist. In the center of the clearing, I saw the figure of a woman standing with her back to me. As I slowly approached her, she stopped calling my name. My emotions were mixed. I was terrified and filled with anxiety. Then I noticed that she was slowly turning around to face me. When she finally turned, I was overcome with sheer horror. Her appearance was horrifying. Half of her face was bruised and disfigured with large scrapes, and blood was dripping from her lips. One eye was half closed and bloodshot, while the other was completely covered in blood. Some parts of her body were also bruised and battered. I felt nauseous, but I managed to hold it in. I stood there, unable to move a single part of my body. She suddenly rushed towards me, grabbed my head with her hands, and screamed directly into my brain, "Kill all your friends. They must die, just like I did. They are alive, and I am not. It's not fair." It was terrifying. My heart almost stopped from fear as she spoke to me, and I noticed that her lips weren't moving. Yet I heard her voice in my head. I tried to explain that it was an accident and that they were not to blame, but she insisted that they must die. After those words, she vanished. I fell to the ground, crying. My friends found me and asked what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. I remained silent the whole time. On our way back, I noticed that Mike was not with us. He must have gotten drunk and passed out somewhere. When we returned to the campsite, I immediately went to my tent. I kept thinking about my wife and how she was right. My friends were enjoying their lives while she was dead. I wanted my wife to be happy, even if it meant taking the lives of my friends. They were sleeping peacefully, unaware of what was to come. Alice just wanted justice. I had to make her happy, even if it wasn't in this earthly life. I stepped out of my tent. Mike was sleeping on the ground, probably passed out from drinking. I took the large knife we had used for cutting meat, approached him, and quickly covered his mouth with one hand while pinching his nose with the other. Then, I swiftly stabbed him in the throat. The knife went through his throat and into the ground. I immediately jammed my fingers into his eyes, all the way to the knuckles, and without removing them, I pulled out the knife and slit his throat. His body convulsed violently. I pressed his dead, bloody body against the ground until the tremors stopped. Then, I carried him into the bushes and left him there. I ran back into the forest and screamed at the top of my lungs to wake the others. I wanted them to split up, it would be easier that way. Sure enough, they saw the pools of blood where Mike had been and noticed that I was missing. They panicked, but eventually started searching for me. They couldn't go anywhere without the car keys, which I had. When they were far enough apart from each other, I began my attack. First, I went for Emily, as she was closer. I grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back. I took a step towards her, and as she opened her mouth to scream, I punched her in the face with a knife, knocking out her front teeth. I pulled the knife out of her mouth and started stabbing her in the face with it. After 15 blows, she stopped showing any signs of life. I threw her body aside and went after John. There he was, walking straight towards the bushes where I was hiding. I picked up a thick stick from the ground and waited for him to get close enough. As soon as he did, I swung the stick with all my might and hit him in the teeth. Blood and teeth flew in different directions and he fell to the ground. I approached him and watched as he cried silently. I raised the stick higher and started beating him on the head. I didn't stop until his head was a bloody mess. Through the bushes, I could see that only Sarah was left. I didn't need to be quiet anymore. I threw away the stick and silently went to find her. When she saw me, she ran towards me, crying and screaming. When she was just a meter away, I jumped, grabbed her by the throat, and head-butted her in the nose. I heard and felt it break. She squealed in pain. I grabbed her by the hair and slammed her face into a tree, over and over again. Finally, she fell to the ground, still alive and conscious. I told her that they should have died in the car accident along with Alice, and that they didn't deserve to live. Then, I took out my knife and decapitated her while she was still alive. I returned to the spot where I had seen the ghost of my wife, and I saw her standing there, laughing loudly. Later, she simply faded into the air. I went back to the car and drove to the city, straight to the police station. I told them everything, was arrested, interrogated, and sentenced to life in a psychiatric hospital. I've been here for 3 years now. Yesterday, my wife came to me again and said that I had one last thing to do. I must join her. I miss her terribly. Tomorrow, I will take the guard's weapon and end my life. And then I will start a new life with my beloved.